Greetings everyone, my name is Zetterville, and welcome back to my Let's Play of Mega Man Dr. Wily's Final Attack. During the last part, I completed Digital Man, Sound Man, and Earth Man stages, so now I'll be going through Weather Man stage, mainly for his pretty powerful shield-based weapon. To be quite honest, I didn't actually need to go to Digital Man stage for his weapon. I went there more for the fact that he was weak against the Mega Buster, taking 2 points of damage per hit. Because I don't use the double shock as much compared to other weapons throughout this LP from here on out, I'd rather use the speed drill because of its increased distance. But I would go through Sandman Stage first due to the Blaring Blast being a really powerful full screen clearing weapon. Anyway, here's Weather Man stage. It takes place in a greenhouse or environmentally controlled facility in the sky, as evidenced by the glass panes throughout the background of this stage. And the music for the stage is a 8-bit remix of Gravity Beetle's stage theme from Mega Man X3. And this stage also has another unique gimmick, or at least progression. We first saw those fans which blow you upwards, and be careful not to get thrown in the spikes. The other interesting gimmick is that it takes place throughout 4 seasons. You first start out with spring with the grass and trees, and move throughout, ending with winter. It's quite interesting and adds to the memorability of the stage. I would say that this is one of my favorite Roadmaster stages in the entire game. Here are these laser turrets. They walk around on the ceiling, and then they fire in a diagonal pattern downwards. Unfortunately, I can't really hit them that easily because I don't have any weapons that can fire in a diagonal pattern, so be a bit cautious. Thankfully, the speed drill does make minced meat out of them. Speaking of the speed drill, I made a slight error when I was talking about how useful the weapon is. I said that it fires in mostly straight pattern but deviates slightly. Really, it fires straight, but its pattern, how far the speed drills can deviate from firing straight, it can go a little bit more extreme than what I said. Because what I said would be like a minor deviation, it's more like moderate deviation. Still, if you can run up next to enemies, it does a lot of damage. Plus, you can hold down the button to constantly fire, and you can have up to 4 speed drills on screen at once. Plus, because it's 2 points of damage, especially at close to medium range, it's basically a replacement for the Mega Buster, especially considering I don't have the charge shot. And we have these rotating, moving platforms, which act like the Gutsman platforms, but thankfully there's no holes in the ground or holes in the wire. However, there are those electric platforms, so if the wing platforms touch the electric parts of the line, you will get electrocuted. The platform will get electrocuted, and if you touch the electrocuted part of the platform, well, you'll get electrocuted. Thankfully, you won't get shunted off the platform, but you will get knocked back, so please be careful, especially in the Wily stages. Also, we have those crackle clouds or whatever. When they open their eyes and charge up, they'll fire a lightning bolt in a diagonal spread from where their eyes are. This was the rainy summer segment of the stage, so there are only 2 more seasons left to go. And between the spring to summer to fall, there are always these golden internal working segments that transition in between each season. I suppose these are the inner workings of this greenhouse facility or something. And now we're in the autumn segment of this stage. I forgot to mention earlier, but we also have those lawnmower enemies, which only travel on the grass, and they release those leaves in a random pattern firing downwards. In the autumn segment, we're introduced to these fan fiend lookalikes. Although they're not as strong as the original ones, they will blow you back in whichever direction they're pointing at. Although it seems that they'll never actually change what direction they're blowing their fan in. Whereas with the fan fiends, they would only try blowing you in or shunting you outwards after a certain period of time. Also, I kinda made a mistake. I was supposed to use that fan fiend lookalike in order to make that jump. In the original version of the fan game, when it had the 30 FPS engine, I had such a hard time crossing that gap, especially without that fan fiend. Because I died 6 or 8 times in the stage, but here I got it my first try. In fact, this is my first attempt at playing through the stage, and I got through it without screwing up as much. Really, the transition of the engine from 30 to 60 FPS made dodging enemies a lot easier. So much so that it makes the traversal through these obstacles and enemies a lot simpler to do. It's an overall improvement in the game and makes it so much easier. And much of the level design, and even with the level design changes, even if the designer didn't really change the level design as much, it wouldn't have, and the 60 FPS change made things a lot easier. Also, that boss corridor was the only room in the stage that actually didn't have the glass panes in the background. Alright, here's Weatherman, and just like his stage, he alternates between 4 attacks from a spring to fall fashion. First he starts with those spring leaves, which he fires upwards, then he fires those summer shockwaves, which will lock onto whichever vertical position you are at, and fire those shock orbs, or shock bolts. Then he'll fire the autumn leaves, which will blow you on the left side, always. And last but not least, he'll fire that chill spike into the above, which will fire about 4 chill spikes to their current horizontal positions, so you have to run away. And then he'll rinse and repeat and loop back to his spring leaf attacks. But he'll always try using those attacks around the middle part of the room, so you know exactly when to jump over him. The only time where he'll have a little bit of RNG is when he uses his fall attack. And by defeating him, we get the Seasonal Barrier, one of the strongest shield-based weapons I've seen in a Mega Man fangame, to be fair. It can resist so many different attacks and projectiles, it's kind of crazy. Compared to how many other shield-based Roadmaster weapons would just fizzle out after a certain number of attacks, this one won't. In fact, in the earlier versions of the game, it was even more broken because you could actually have the Seasonal Barrier up, and you could use either the Mega Buster or certain other special weapons. Not all of them, but quite a few of them, which made it even more broken. But sadly, we can only have the Seasonal Barrier up now in this version. It does fix the early exploit, but it makes it kind of weaker. Here's Glacier Man Stage, with a remix of Cold Man Stage from Mega Man and Bass. Having the Seasonal Barrier makes this starting segment so much easier because you can avoid getting hit by the snowflakes, as well as those Arctic bunnies or Arctic hares. Otherwise you would be a lot more dangerous than falling into the pit. Now, one negative I've noticed is that the ice segments, or at least the slippery block segments of the stage, they seem to be acting a little bit odd when in the 60 FPS version. Whereas in the 30 FPS version of the engine, the slippery blocks acted relatively normally, but in the 60 FPS version of the engine, they seem to act kind of crazy in terms of movement, because even a minor movement over those slippery blocks can actually shoot you forward a lot more than what you would normally expect. Oh sure, I would expect that when walking on these slippery ice blocks, you would be moved a little bit, you don't have as much traction, but in this game, it seems like you accelerate a lot faster when on those ice blocks, or you maintain acceleration for longer than what you would expect in Mega Man Classic games. Anyways, we have those walking upwards, whatever those upward walkers are on the top, which will drop those spikes, or icicle spikes. We have the refrigerator enemy, which when it opens its door, it'll fire a projectile at whatever position you're at. And unfortunately it acts like a Sniper Joe, where you can only damage it when its door is open. We already saw what the Arctic hares and the snowflakes are. And here's the first mini-boss of the stage, or the mini-boss, this octopus. It'll fire electric shocks from each arm when they're up, or each tentacle. The weakness of each tentacle is, of course, the tip of each. This boss fight isn't that difficult, but trust me, the Wily 43 fight can be quite hectic. Plus, you can easily dispatch of it using stuff like the double shock or speed drill. And this is the only stage, well, also combined with Earthman Stage, which has a dedicated water segment, at least in the 8 main Robot Master stages. And now we have the Snail enemy. Basically, once you shoot it once, it'll go into the shell and release the spread of all those spikes. So unless you use something like the Blaring Blast, Speed Arrow, or Speed Drill, you'll have to dodge out of the way of those spikes. Now you have to worry. Normally you would have to worry about all of these Arctic hares and those walkers on the top drawing these icicles while running on these fragile blocks. So if you get hit by one of the icicles while you're running on these blocks, you'd probably fall into the pit. But with the Blaring Blast, it's a cinch. Also, we have those yellow fish which basically patrol the region from left to right. So other than that, they aren't much of a threat. You just need to be careful so you don't just run right into those fish. After all, they only patrol left and right, and they don't vary their positioning. Here's something that reminds me of Splash Woman Stage. We basically have these refrigerators which fire these icicle blocks at certain intervals. We need to ride them upwards in order to progress vertically throughout the stage. Like in this part, you have to be a little bit careful so you don't jump into the spikes. but other than that, it isn't too bad. To be fair, this segment would be a lot easier if we had the rush coil, but sadly we never get a rush utility in this game, nor anything related to a utility item in this game. I said earlier that this reminds me a lot of Mega Man 2 physics in several regards, but we don't even get any utility items in this game, just Roadmaster weapons. Well, we do get one utility item in the game technically, but we won't get that until we complete the Secret Roadmaster stage, which we get by collecting all the Brian letters. And in that last segment, that snowstorm pushes you forward, so be cautious while making jumps, especially backwards. Here's Glacier Man, who seems like a recolored Heat Man, if you ask me. First, he fires two chill spikes or icicles forward. Two of them are just directly forward and close to him, and then one that's really far away. He tries to fire at the wall, so make sure not to jump there. And then after that, he tries jumping right into whatever your horizontal position is, just like here, and then he jumps twice more. And then he fires that frost arrow upwards, which after a while, it'll freeze into a block and then shatter into a whole bunch of arrows after a while, so make sure to run as far as you can to the opposite side of the screen, otherwise you have no chance of blocking that. Rinse and repeat, and the boss fight is done. Really, the main difficulty is trying to guide him away and trying to guide him to one part of the screen so he can actually avoid his frost arrow attack, which we get as his special weapon. Basically, we can either freeze the frost arrow in midair just like he did, and then after a while it'll split up into those 12 icicles, 12 or so, and then following that, or you could actually just use it on an enemy, and if it kills the enemy, it'll basically leave a frost block there which will later shatter. And last but not least, let's go to Coppice Man Stage, the Forest Roadmaster. And there was a difference in terms of the musical tracks. The original musical track of the stage was a remix version of Snake Man's theme, a MIDI version specifically. But now we have Plant Man's stage theme, which makes sense considering that the platforms of the stage are actually recolored versions or reused versions of Plant Man's stage. We already saw two enemy types. We have these slumbering worms, which if you get close enough to them, they'll jump out and try chasing you. We also had the owls, where they perch on the trees, and if you get too close to them, they'll swoop downwards. In this segment, we have these rowing boats, which only go around these waterfall segments. And if you're below them, they drop all of these fish or sorts. And we have another enemy over there. These well, first off, we have bees over here. If you destroy the beehive, they'll stop respawning. Otherwise, you can use them for restocking on weapon energy. We have those grass mets, which basically act like normal mets, but when they get out of their shell, they'll slowly start walking towards you. Just like normal mets, if you want to destroy them, you have to use the Mega Buster. When their shells are open, that's when you can use the Mega Buster and similar abilities. Or you can use the Blaring Blast, Double Shock, or other piercing abilities to just pierce right through them. And of course, their Buster Shot actually locks on roughly to where your position is, so you've got to be careful, or your last position. And we have these bulb enemies, which when they explode, they release those seeds in an arcing pattern. And here's the gimmick of this stage, or one of them at least. In addition to being a forest team, we also have the fact that we have those swinging vines that you have to climb onto. Thankfully, as long as you lock onto whatever position they're on, you'll lock onto the bottom part. And we now have these, whatever those upgraded versions of those grass mets are. These grass men, once you destroy the bottom portion, usually when they throw that pole or whatever, they'll revert to being a normal grass met, so then you need to destroy the grass portion. Unless, of course, you use the remote mine, or Blaring Blast, or any type of piercing weapon. Then you can circumvent the process. And having the seasonal berry makes this segment a lot easier because now you don't need to worry about getting shunted into that spike pit. Or if you do, well, it's almost instant death. And we have a return of those totem enemies from whichever Mega Man game that was, I forget. And here's the mini-boss, the giant bee, which basically tries to lock onto your position 3 times and then release a bee seeker or something. And then after that you reach the midpoint of the stage, and suddenly you're taken to a water segment of sorts. Whenever you're in this waterfall, you're constantly being pushed forward. so be careful while trying to make jumps backwards. And you need to ride on each of these, whatever these platforms are, which will destroy on impact the wall. And you need to ride it toward the end of this segment. And thankfully this is the only usage of this gimmick in the stage, so it isn't too bad. And here's the final gimmick of the stage, springs, combined with the vines. They work exactly the same way as they did in Sandman Stage, so there shouldn't be any worries. You also may have noticed this when I was traversing through the stage, but in this game, when one of your projectiles is reflected off of another enemy, like a shielded enemy, if it actually hits another enemy, it will damage them. So projectiles work the same way as it did in Rock Force. This will be used in a certain boss fight in the Wily Fortress, so keep that in mind. It certainly means that when one of your projectiles is reflected out of the stage, it isn't wasted, thankfully. Whereas in many other Mega Man classic games and fan games, if your shot is reflected, it won't damage an enemy if it comes in contact with the reflected projectile. Thankfully, the chill spike, even though it's kind of hard to aim and it takes quite a while for it to actually explode, you can't remotely detonate it, because of how it has those 12 chill spikes and how each chill spike or frost arrow actually does 3 points of damage, I think. It's actually quite powerful, especially if you can leave it right in front of an enemy. It can quite easily decimate a few mini-bosses if you can position it correctly when it explodes so an enemy can get hit by most of those frost arrows. As you can see there, it just decimated that totem. Strangely enough, it doesn't have the destruction sound effect it normally does. Because normally if you destroy an enemy with any other weapon, it'll have the explosion sound effect. But once they get destroyed by the frost arrow, they don't have that sound effect played for some reason. This is the last segment of the stage. The original version of the stage, the level design was slightly different and it was a bit harder to get through this. Anyways, here's the boss fight against Coppice Man. He's one of the only bosses in this game who have some RNG involved. First, Coppice Man will run in front of you and try creating a vine, similar to what a Forest Man does in Roku-chan. Then after that, and after walking for a while, he will release 3 Hawk Seekers. Basically, they'll fire upwards, and then after a short period of time once they go upwards, they'll lock onto whatever your last horizontal position was. Really, the danger of this fight isn't really avoiding the Hawk Seeker, it's the fact that he can actually zone you out and corner you with that vine, and it can be a little bit difficult to determine when he'll throw that vine. It seems to have some RNG involved. Otherwise, if he just keeps walking left and right, releasing those Hawk Seekers, it isn't too much of a problem. It's just that when he suddenly stops and releases that vine, and can potentially corner you, that's where problems start to come. Otherwise, he's not that bad. I would say he's one of the most difficult of the main Robot Master fights, but it's only because of that unpredictability. And by defeating him, we get the Hawk Seeker. Well then, in this part, I defeated Weatherman, Glacier Man, and Coppice Man. In the next part, I'll be taking care of the 3 remaining Robot Masters. Thanks for watching, and have a nice day. Toodles!